In the world of generative AI, do you think it'll be in the data center or do you think it'll be in the cloud? If you're curious, this video is for you. Hi, my name is Michael Gibbs, and I'm the founder and CEO of Go Cloud Careers. I'm joined with David Linthicum, who's an expert in cloud and generative AI. Today, we're going to have this discussion on where artificial intelligence is going to be in the future. Do we house it in the data center or do we house it in the cloud? David, I'll begin with you. What are your thoughts on cloud versus the data center for generative AI and AI in general?
It's all the discussion right now that I seem to be getting into, and I think for good reason. So enterprises, they go, we're going to build these systems for sure, and these systems are going to be very expensive and huge honking things. And we're looking at the cloud, and and in some instances, the cloud is going to be the more convenient way to do it because the tool sets are there, the ecosystem's there, but it's going to be very expensive. In some applications on premise is going to be cheaper, but we're giving up some things. In other words, we have to maintain everything, install the hardware, we have to hire people around to maintain it, we have to deal with premise security, all the things you have to do with those. But we are seeing some of the estimates that are coming back where something's going to cost $3 million a year to run in the cloud, say AWS, for example, but Microsoft and Google about the same thing. $500,000 a year to run on premise. Now, this is for a particular problem. In other words, they're always they're always different. And that's fairly compelling. In other words, that's a lot of money that you probably would rather spend on other things. And so they're making the decision to keep them on premise. In other instances, they're not finding a viable set of tools to deal with the on-premise systems. In other words, they can't get the technology they need to install that'll run on something that in a hardware system they can buy. And so they're using cloud by default because it's providing them with the core-based capabilities that they need to build a viable system. System may not be as big. There may be, smaller language models that they're leveraging, things like that, not use as much storage, not needing much data. And it's fairly economically viable to run on the cloud. So we put it on the cloud versus some of the on-premise stuff. So these decisions are starting to pop up. And while it used to be, hey, we're moving it to the cloud, that's not the default anymore. And I'm into, talking to people, and their conversation goes, tell me where it should go based on what this system's needs. And it's not a default jump. And I think, by the way, I'm seeing consultants out there that are saying everything needs to go to the cloud. In half the cases that I'm looking at, the cloud is not the best viable economic option. It's better to put it on premise. And so having these question marks come up, where it's not an automatic punt to the cloud like we did for the last 10 years, is really kind of throwing a monkey wrench into the industry. Because obviously, if you're going to put it on premise, you have to buy specialized hardware, the GPU systems, things like that, deal with the database integration stuff. But what they're telling me out there is that the data that they need to train these systems, in 9 times out of 10, is already on premise. In other words, some of it may exist in the cloud, but that's where it is. And so if they build the AI system on premise, they're able to get the advantage of having lower latency, core connectivity to move petabytes of information. If those things remain on premise and you're putting it in the cloud, the cost of egress and ingress into those environments is incredibly expensive. And by the way, Amazon just lowered their cost on that. But the thing is, that's going to throw a huge economic monkey wrench into putting your systems in the cloud. So it's not a foregone conclusion anymore. And so we have to be architects. We have to make some tough decisions. We have to look at what the system's doing. We have to look at the viable options. And we have to understand that in half the cases, it's not going to be the cloud. And we need to figure out which case those are. It's never going to be an automatic. I look at, okay, this, and this. Here's my formula. Goes to the cloud. This, and this goes on premise. You have to get down into the details of the requirements of the technology, what you're trying to do, what the use cases are, how you're applying this stuff to the business, how it's going to be used, what part of the country it's going to be used, whether it's going to be internationally deployed system. I mean, all these things really kind of come to bear. And it becomes a very complex architectural decision that we have to make, but it's one that's worth it because it's going to cost the business many millions of dollars in data and money that just goes right out the window if we make the wrong calls.
Yeah, and that's really the key. What is the use case? I mean, generally speaking, storage is cheaper on premise. Generally speaking, compute is cheaper on premise. Generally, not always. And in most cases, network performance is much greater on premise because we can deal with a single fiber optic cable for meters as opposed to hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers. So it's typically better. But, we've got to do it all ourselves. And, does that organization have the sophistication to do that themselves? Do they have the right people? Can they create whatever tools they need, or is it better for them to leverage other people's tools? And it always goes back to it depends. To me, architecture is about evaluating trade-offs. And I come from internal medicine, and I moved into architecture, and it felt like the same job. Because in either career, we've got things that we can use. We've got our modalities, whether they be a medication or whether they be a graphics processing. It's really the same. It's which tool do we use to get there? And there's no medication for every use case. There's no technology for every use case. It all goes back to this. So I find it interesting that we're back here. We're always having this cloud versus data center discussion, and I think it's there. But to me, the AI thing right now is really exciting. I mean, you and I have worked on AI systems probably 20, 30 years now. But the generative AI to me is really kind of fun and kind of pretty special.
Yeah, it is fun, and it does do some very cool stuff, and we all use it. And it's going to provide value to lots of aspects of our lives, and how we drive cars, and how we automate our shopping, and all those sorts of things are going to be part of the deal. However, it's also an incredible resource hog. It uses specialized processors. It uses storage systems that go on forever. It needs lots and lots of data. The data has to be in the proper hygiene to make it happen. You need to continuously improve the models as you go forward. So lots of processing occurs all the time. You're running a processor load that's probably 10 times that of a normal application if you're deploying these systems. And all these things really kind of come to bear that there's a big price tag with running these systems. The way I like to explain it, in essence, you're buying another refrigerator, but this one is the one that is going to talk to you, and it takes 10 times the power as your existing refrigerator. So it's going to have value, and certainly if you use it, you may have a need to do that, but you have to understand the economic trade-off of making this happen and keeping your food cold, and what that means versus this sort of system versus other viable architectures. The other decision that needs to be looked at is whether or not we use GPUs or not. In some instances, people are saying, well, it's got to be a GPU. We hear the graphics processing units say, certainly they add a lot of power because they're able to do things in parallel. That's where they're built to process graphics. But not every case do generative AI need GPUs as a slam dunk. And so we have to look at the trade-offs there. Also, lots of specialized processors are starting to be built. You have to figure out where those are going to have a viable use within the systems, whether they're in the cloud or on premise. So we're doing something incredibly tough right now. We're making decisions about technology that's changing at a rate that I've never seen it change in my life. So cycling, the processors are improving, the memory loads are improving, the platforms are improving, the generative AI tools are improving at a rapid pace, but we have to make a call on how to build a system now, not 10 years from now, not 5 years from now, but now, because so the architectural decisions have to be made and use the current set of technology the way we understand it. But as part of an architect's duty is they need to figure out where everything's going and make sure they're placing the proper bets, not only so the technology can be viable today, but viable in a short period of time. And that's an incredibly tough thing to do.
It really is. You know what these times remind me of? When we first started building out the internet, that was kind of when I got into tech. I was just so impressed back in 1996 how I could talk to my people in Greece, my relatives, and I didn't have to pay $4 a minute for it. So that made me get involved in networking. And I was there for the big internet build out, for building networks and all these companies and connecting to them in the internet and then connecting their wide area networks, and loved it. And it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then for a while, there was almost no change. The only difference in the CPUs that were out there, the GPUs that were out there, the networks, was now they used less power. And I almost call it that lost generation of where, like that lost decade where Intel's new CPUs were the same CPUs, but now they ran less wattage, and out of nowhere, we started to get some really good server CPUs that were real powerful, that were double and triple the capacity, which are now what the cloud's running on. We started to have some GPUs that could run calculations that like nothing else in the world. And as soon as that came out, it's like, oh, look at the fun we can do with it. And then this generative AI, and to me, this feels like the new boom and the new bubble all at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's the way we have to look at it. So let's learn from our mistakes and opportunities of the past. And I would when I talk to the press and they talk about the NVIDIA IPO and its huge meteoric rise, I always equivalent to Yahoo, back in the 90s. And we were building kind of a bubble then as well. And so our ability to look at what the past is likely to bring and how it's going to repeat itself. I think in a few years it's going to normalize. It's going to be a lot of GPU producers out there. No one's going to have a corner of the market on the GPU markets, things like that. Also, we're going to be smarter. We're going to understand that we're able to, cluster CPUs in a better economic way to create a better processing system than leveraging GPUs. And we're going to have all of these things that we know then that we don't know now because we haven't started to make the mistakes. And I do see a tremendous amount of mistakes about to be made because people are moving too fast, which is okay. I understand why they're doing it. They're doing so with a sense of urgency. They feel they need to build a innovative differentiator for their particular businesses, and that's going to build their businesses on. So they're making the investments. But whatever we think now, in 5 years is going to be different. And if anything we can learn from, it's how we adopted cloud computing. What we thought in 2010, very different in 2015, and very, very different in 2020. So understand that and be wise to those decisions. In other words, if you're an architect, the ability to build systems that accommodate change is the big thing to it. We're able to put volatility into a domain. We're not marrying proprietary architectures that are going to limit our growth and limit our flexibility into the future. We're going to provide data integration mechanisms that are able to change as we need to. We're not going to build specialized databases. We're not going to, buy into technology that's very cool, but isn't necessarily proven. And so it's making the right decisions for the right reasons. And this is, I think, the time where it's going to separate the good from the great. In other words, the great architects out there understand this. They're making decisions. They're not allowing themselves to be pushed into making decisions too early. They're making the right decisions based on the information that they have. In some cases, they're holding off on leveraging technology around generative AI until it matures a bit. In other cases, they're investing because they figure the risk is going to be worth it. And I think those are the ones who are going to succeed. And so it's going to be a very interesting couple of years, Mike, where we see a lot of mistakes and a lot of people who avoid the mistakes are able to take everything to the next level. And I think I'm glad to have a ringside seat to it and participate in the marketplace, but it is absolutely going to be nothing like we've ever seen in the industry before, inclusive of cloud, which I view as kind of the biggest revolution in IT that happened throughout the entire history of IT. Now it's happening again, but it's doing so at a fast pace.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And I think you highlighted something important. We don't exactly know where these things are going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but going in there with an open standard, without using a proprietary database, leveraging as few proprietary tools as possible, means we can set them up today where they're going to work. And then as we need to change them, it'll be a lot easier to change them if we use open standards as opposed to locking ourselves in with a single vendor or a vendor-specific thing. And then it doesn't work, and now we've got to go re-architect and begin from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that our ability to consider the possible directions that we're going to have is really going to be the winning move. So everybody who follows the trends and follows the crowd, I think are going to be led astray because I see everybody moving to unviable, uneconomically useful architectures for particular enterprises. And the ones who are looking at this technology as something that's going to be strategic to what they do for the business, but are making the right incremental moves, such as spending the money on getting their data in a better state before they start leveraging generative AI. So they have the training data to make it happen, the ability to look at the use cases, make sure we're using the correct use cases for generative AI. I see awful, use cases for generative AI that just have no business. Others are doing transactional data and things like that. Sales order entry systems, that's not what it's for. The ability to leverage for something is going to have a good economic advantage, going to have a good strategic and innovative advantage in the marketplace. And those are the big things. And then your ability to make the bets that need to be made, and also understand you're going to live within a budget. So you need to understand what that budget is. You need to understand how you're going to hire the people that need to build these systems, which you're going to have the talent in the organization to make it happen. What technologies are likely going to be spent based on the amount of money you're able to spend, and how fast you're able to go, and then become realistic around that. And that's going to be tough when you see other organizations who are moving fast and furious toward particular solutions and doing press releases every couple of days. But in many cases, those are going to be the ones who lose out. They're not going to win because they're misspending money, because they're moving in directions that don't make good economic sense for their business. And I think that generative AI is going to accelerate that, because it's going to accelerate the amount of impact that mistakes are going to have. People are going to make mistakes with 5 zeros at the end, or 9 zeros at the end.
Yeah.
And they're going to miss other opportunities that they should have been taken. They're going to be more advantageous to the business by going out and misapplying the technology to use cases that are completely illogical. And so we'll see where we are in 5 years. I'd like to do this show in 5 years. We can kind of go back and look at what we said now, and I guarantee it's going to be, I told you so. You guys should have been looking at this, and you should have been evaluating, heeding our words that we're going to take this, that these things are going to be decisions that are going to come to haunt you. So pay attention to what you're doing, make the right decisions, over research, over understand, figure out where your as-is state is, figure your to-be state needs to go, figure out a strategy, hire the right talented people around you, help you make those decisions. All those things need to occur now.
They need to occur now, and we need to be careful in how we vet. You mentioned one key thing. Actually, you mentioned a lot of important things, but you mentioned the opportunity cost. If we sink too much money into this thing that's not going to work, we can no longer provide it to other aspects of the business that need it. And that's so critical, which means, reaching out to AI experts, not talking about the person yesterday who was writing code and today is the AI expert of the world. Finding people that understand AI, that understands what these systems are, that can evaluate it from an entire business perspective. Not just, I learned AI yesterday and I'm here to go solve all your problems that I don't completely understand.
Yeah, it's going to put some stress on the continuous learners out there. And so it's going to ask them to go back and refigure out lots of things that need to be refigured out. I mean, we just, just working through the whole generative architecture stuff, for the last couple of years of my career, there's so much stuff that just changes there that you need to be wary of. It's very data oriented. The security model changes, the governance model changes. How you leverage the technology in a typical business use case changes. And people who are able to reinvent their knowledge and get down to brass tacks as to how things are done, the procedures to make it happen, and leveraging existing models and methodology, and learning from as many other people as they can. Those are the ones that are going to end up winning here. Right now, I see a lot of doing and not a lot of learning, and I think they both need to occur at the same time. So there needs to be much more learning in terms of how you're going to leverage this technology. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, which I understand. Everybody's AI washing their technology, and I understand why they're doing that. Businesses are interested in accelerating their use and consumption of generative AI in the system. All of that's fine. I understand why that's occurring, but there has to be some knowledge. There has to be some adult behavior that kind of goes with running this stuff. And I think the ones who do that, the ones who make the right choices, history is going to be very kind to them. They're going to build innovative businesses where they're able to build, supply chain optimization stuff, which is going to be a key innovative differentiator for a particular business, where they're able to sell something at 20% under what the other people are selling and sell this and increase quality by 10%. The ability to look at the manufacturing processes, leveraging AI enhancement to optimize those systems. They're able to build things that are almost perfectly built and are going to be 50% less in the cost, and the ability to deliver those things on demand, customized and bespoke for the particular systems. We're going to see that kind of innovation that's game changing, that this technology is able to do. But it's going to come out of organizations that are thinking about how to use this technology effectively and not necessarily how quickly they can implement it. And those are two different discussions. And I'm having the how quick to implement discussions now with everybody and anybody, and not the how to use it effectively with many people. And I'd like to start changing those discussions because those are going to be much more productive. Those are the discussions that the winners are going to have. And we'll know that in 5 years.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, and I love it, learning before doing, not learning by doing and afterwards going, uh-oh, ideally learning and prepping before we do. David, I really enjoyed our conversation on the cloud versus on-premise for generative AI. It's going to be something that I think we're going to have a lot of fun watching this movie unfold over the next couple of years. Thank you for sharing your expertise. If you've enjoyed this video, please give the video a like. Please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified of more videos to help you in your cloud computing, AI architect, or any type of cloud architecture career. Look forward to seeing you soon.